Hello, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Thursday, the 27th of July. I believe it's the 27th today. It doesn't matter. It's Thursday. I'd like to share with you some thoughts on not perfection in humanity. I've been reading the thesis for one of my congregation members who did her PhD in the study of palliative care in children who have neurodegenerative diseases. It's been an absolutely incredible read. I can only do it for about 10 minutes every day because it's just so rich, and it's such a heavy, difficult topic. But in it, she quotes Jean Vanier. She refers to Jean Vanier, who was the founder of the worldwide L'Arche community for profoundly disabled individuals, and who wrote of those who are weak, he wrote of how those who are weak have great difficulty finding their place in our society. The image of the ideal human disenfranchises the old, the sick, and the less abled. In some cultures, children with disabilities are seen as a punishment from God. There is a turning away from those who are different, those who live on the margins. Perhaps in our limited understanding, we shun our own weakness and the weakness in others. And she quotes Vanier to say, "We all want to turn away from anything that reveals the failure, pain, sickness, and death beneath the brightly painted surface of our ordered lives." Over the years, I have had several opportunities to work indirectly and a little bit directly sometimes with members of L'Arche or other people who have physical and developmental disabilities or different abilities, as they say. And while sometimes, especially when I was younger, it really terrified me. I wasn't sure how to handle people. I didn't know how to handle myself around people who were so profoundly different than I was. Most of it was around communication. How do you speak to someone? How do you communicate with someone who doesn't seem to understand you and certainly doesn't seem to have the ability to speak to you or communicate in ways that are typical to you, typical to me? That was always a kind of a terror I had. I had an adjacent family member. My sister's adopted, and it was her biological cousin's adopted brother who was profoundly what we used to term mentally retarded. But I think he would have been someone that, had a large community been available, might have been helpful for him. He lived at home for very many years, and his parents were absolutely fantastic with him, helping him to live his life in a way that allowed him opportunities to try new things and to be present within a family community and not being sort of shuffled off to Buffalo to be with someone else who could handle that kind of thing. They loved him incredibly, and he was a cherished member of his family. That isn't always the case. There are some families who are unable, they don't have the strength, they don't have the gifts, they may not have the resources to be able to nurture and care for a child, especially as that child grows into a full-grown man or woman, and all of that goes with it. But Jean Vanier created a program, founded a group called L'Arche, and it's around the world now. If you've never seen it, heard of it, I invite you to look it up. It's spelled capital L apostrophe capital A RCHE, the L'Arche community. And Henry Nouwen was very much involved with Daybreak, I believe it's called, out of the Toronto area in Canada. And he was a profoundly important part of that community, of the L'Arche community worldwide. And the idea being that able-bodied people would come and live with members of L'Arche. And the amazing thing is that those able-bodied people often discovered that those who maybe were differently abled or are not able to do the things that we consider to be the normative things of growing up, of walking and talking and writing and getting jobs and things like that, and the physical ableness of people, that they discovered that a lot of the people who worked in or who lived in community in L'Arche discovered the profound gifts that people who were differently abled could share, and found that in their own ways they were in some ways themselves not as able, even though they had working limbs and are able to articulate themselves. The sense that maybe what we deem as perfect, maybe not as perfect as we thought. In this particular study, in this thesis, this person is working. The student was working with families who had children who were born with diseases that would slowly and sometimes quickly take those children's lives away. That these are children who would not grow up into normal adulthood, and how difficult it was for the families to deal with that and all of the challenges that come with that. But it seems natural to me because I've grown up most of my adult life. I've known about Jean Vanier and the L'Arche community, but they are not necessarily worldwide known. Like lots of people worldwide know them, but L'Arche is not a household name for people. And so I was a little bit surprised when I came across this in her thesis, because in the back of my head, this was a normative thing, that L'Arche is a natural thing that people could have. The two things that she's studying, the group that she was studying, and the L'Arche community, to me, these two things were a natural link. But for someone who is not was not aware of L'Arche, or for some families who wouldn't be aware that this is a thing, I can see why this would be a profound image. But she says here, the image of the ideal human disenfranchises the old, the sick, and the less abled. And it's true. When we look at our society, how difficult is it for us to recognize that we have this sort of standard of what is the right way, what is the correct way to be, what is the perfect human being. We have this image of, the perfect woman is about a size 2 or a 0. And, you go into clothing stores as a woman, you go into any mall, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to find that the stores don't hold clothing past size 14. And yet the average size woman is well beyond a size 14. Those stores cater to a part of the population that is in the minority. And yet for the majority of people, the image of what is normal is not what is real, at least not in the North American culture. And yet the image of the ideal human indicates that the old, the sick, and the less abled are not as good as. That somehow we have this ideal person, this ideal human, and all of these other people fall apart, don't fall into them. So someone who is blind as a bat is somehow abnormal because I don't have perfect eyesight. Or someone who is not a size 2 or a size 14 or 16 is not, doesn't fit into the norm, into what we feel comfortable with, what we look upon and say, that's correct, that's right. And then we multiply that. Imagine if I am a woman who's almost 5'10", and I am, seriously into the plus sizes, and I own that. I know that. I'm okay with that. It's frustrating to find clothing, but I'm okay with that. If I am feeling with just those two things, being blind as a bat and an Amazon woman, if I find that I am judged, that I am considered not normal or not good enough by people, what about someone who is more obviously different? What about someone whose skin is a different color or who speaks a different language, which in our country, in Canada, is becoming bigger and bigger? People who have accents that those of us who are native to Canada, meaning like we've been here for more than a couple of years, like those people, those of us who have been born here, and I'm not talking about Indigenous, I'm just talking about those of us who sort of think of ourselves as the ones who've been here for however long, those who don't sound like us. What about that person that we struggle to understand? Because if we are struggling to understand what they are saying to us with their accent or with their language, how much more are they struggling to understand us with our language and our accent? And guess what? Even for those of us who think we don't have an accent, to somebody else in the world, we have an accent, okay? We just do. Then add on, what happens if that person is born with a cleft palate? Or someone is born without fingers or limbs, or someone is born with hydrocephalia, I think that's how you pronounce it, or someone who is born in some other way, shape, or form with some other difficulty? Or what if they're born and they're unable to speak, or they're unable to mature physically and emotionally and mentally beyond the age of 4 or 5 years old? Someone who has Down syndrome, someone who is on the autism scale. We look at folks like that and think, oh, they're not normal. But that's not what we should do. We should be looking at them and seeing them as differently normal. They are a human being. They're a child of God. God did not do something to punish them. As she says, in some cultures, children with disabilities are seen as a punishment from God. No, not at all. They are not a punishment from God. Every child, however they are born, is a gift from God. And it is our responsibility to unwrap that gift, to discover what that child, whether it is, somebody who's blind as a bat, or someone who never gains their sight and is never able to grow beyond the maturity level or intelligence scale of a 4-year-old, who is never able to communicate and speak and play like any other child or person. That doesn't mean that they are not a gift. It's our responsibility to discover what is normal in that person, to enter into their reality and discover the gifts that they share because of who they are. The L'Arche community does exactly that. Every core member, every person who looks to be disabled, who is differently abled, has a right and the responsibility to participate in community in whatever ways they can. And that in the L'Arche communities is upheld, and it is honored, and it is celebrated. And the other people who come on board, the more able-bodied, so to speak, who come on board and join in community, are not coming to be the savior. They are coming to be the companion, the alongside-er. And they learn from each other, and they discover each other's gifts, and they love, and they share, and they fight, and they learn, and they get angry, and they cry, and they laugh. And they recognize that every child of God is absolutely normal and is absolutely a gift and is absolutely someone who has intrinsic worth. And I think that's where we need to start, because it feels an awful lot like a lot of people in this world feel that someone else doesn't have any intrinsic worth because of who they were born to be and who they can become. And there are a whole lot of people out there who've been told that they do not have any intrinsic worth because of who they are, who need to be taught, who need to be honored, who need to be shared, have to have the truth shared with them, that because they breathe, they have intrinsic worth. And they are a gift. And they are normal. And they need to be welcomed into our society, not shunned from it. They are not a punishment, but they are an incredible opportunity for our communities to grow and live and share. So I really do encourage you to look up the L'Arche communities and to think about where you, in your life, in your situation, in your community, where you recognize the people in your life, in your community, who maybe don't look so normal according to, social media standards. But if we were to look at them through God's eyes, we would see how absolutely normal they are. Have a great day. God bless you. And I will be back again tomorrow for Feel Good Friday.